Hi, Tina. How are you? How are you
Hi.
going?
Thank you for having me hang out in this room. I've never tried this software before, and it's
Oh,
super
yeah.
dope. I feel
It's
like I'm in
actually,
a professional studio.
I think that is like part of the most amazing, kind of like one of the most amazing consequences of kind of pandemic mode over the last 2 years, which is
Mhm.
just like all of these tools coming out that help like enable life on the internet. And
Mhm.
so I actually I was doing a lot of reading in the last couple of days, trying to read all of your writing with fake pixels, and I'd love to get into some of the pieces. So as an as an investor at Pace Capital, and then also writing fake pixels, and now also working on Station. Um, so your plate seems like very full in the best way. But just talking about these internet tools, there was a term in your embedded education piece that
Mhm.
was you said that you were like a digitally native Renaissance woman.
Oh,
And oh my goodness, I loved that so much. And I was just like, okay, you need to tell me what digitally native Renaissance woman means to you.
yeah. I was half joking about that term because definitely it sounds very obnoxious to call oneself a Renaissance woman. But totally, the idea is how in the past, right? Like I think the people that um, I personally really admire, and I know a lot of people on the internet also. It's very encouraging to see more and more talent are a little bit more courageous about exploring what they love, and they, you know, I think there's usually a general theme of what they want to contribute. And recently, it's if it's not obvious yet, like for me, it's like I'm completely red pilled into this world of crypto and Web3, and finding ways to contribute in the past was like a very structural process, right? Like you have to network with X amount of people, and then work at a certain place, and then it just like after the industrial revolution, I think all the path has almost been like laid down for you.
Mhm.
Versus in the past, like when Da Vinci was very excited about understanding human anatomy, I think a lot of times they explore a bunch of different things, and the ability to kind of have that environment to practice all those crafts was a lot of it is economic prosperity. And during the time of a lot of these polymath or Renaissance people were thriving, it was really because there's both the bread and the circus. It's like the entertainment, the kind of
Mhm.
spiritual need, and the physical needs are both being met. And kind of tying back to being digitally native is that like information right now is so abundant that in a
Mhm.
way that we're almost like overindulging in it a little bit, where
Mhm.
there's just so much out there. um, but in order to actually have that prosperity that we can see from back in the Renaissance time again, one way to do it is to start kind of synthesizing some of these ideas and start building. But right now, I think there's also this kind of lack of spirituality, very
Mhm.
present in our time, where everyone is like very eager for meaning, but because of the kind of preconceived notion of, I guess, the industrial process of like having to create your career in a certain way or having to live your life in a certain way, that the abundance of information hasn't been a real tailwind or benefit
Mm.
for a lot of these people. So you kind of need both. You need to be like, completely embracing that abundance and trying to make the most out of it, because there really is a lot of good free stuff, right? Like I think in the
Mhm.
embedded
Totally.
education piece, it's just like, yeah, like tuition has been really expensive. You need education to get credential, to get that prestige. But if you actually are looking for knowledge, like not school is not necessarily the best place to go,
Mhm.
in terms of especially um, kind of knowledge that in a more first principle way that you personally want to explore in a way that suits you. And the best way to explore that is just by like making a project that you love, or like
Mhm.
trying to contribute in a way that like immediately add value, and slowly you build your knowledge there. And it's a very different way of thinking about things that's a little bit, I think, more reminiscent of how people learned in the past, that was a little bit more fluid and multidisciplinary, rather than like hyper structured. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because when you're talking about the Renaissance, it gives me crypto vibes, like Web3 vibes about what is happening at the moment, and
Mm-hmm.
definitely the potential of it. And I think what's really interesting is this idea of abundance versus scarcity. And so I feel like, particularly over the last few decades, we have been conditioned to think that many things are scarce, and the internet has kind of blown that model wide open in a lot of ways, like you said, with information and even kind of accessibility. And so I wonder at what point does abundance go from abundance to excess? And does it have anything to do with that kind of cultural aspect that you were talking about? Because just thinking about, what it means to be abundant, like as an individual, what it means to feel abundant, and then how maybe just in the last, few years in particular, it has kind of veered into this different direction, which is almost kind of like gross in a way. Like it's not harmonious and just like a beautiful expression of what abundance could be. It's kind of detoured. And so how do you think about, that that really kind of positive space that we can get to through the tools that we have digitally with this idea of abundance?
Mm. That's a great question. And very, I mean, I do not have an answer to that question, but I think the delineation that you have around abundance and access is very interesting. Um, I think abundance has always been a concept, like ever
Mm-hmm.
since almost humanity. If you look at like air, right, you can say that air is in abundance, but like things that are in abundance is not valuable because people actually want to be, want to desire things that are scarce. And, that's why you manufacture different rules and laws and all that stuff just to make sure that everyone is incentivized to preserve what is theirs. And that is like why capitalism, like privatization of land and kind of the whole trajectory of, yeah, like human history, right? Like it's a lot of it is, actually a pretty clever way to kind of
Mm-hmm.
manipulate human psychology in the way that everyone's very incentivized to work. Because like if we just have everything we need, we'll just be like roaming around, right? Like just like don't do anything. And the reason why we are have the drive, like have the desire that we do, like whether it's strive for beauty, whether it's strive for truth, whether it's strive for knowledge, whether it's strive for something else, in some way, like there is this level of scarcity always encoded in human nature. So whether that is scarcity of resources, so that maybe you want knowledge, but in the past, like all the knowledge are maybe stored in libraries, and only a few people
Mm-hmm.
have resources for those information. It's scarcity of in the past land, and that's why you want to conquer. The
Mm-hmm.
colonialism happened because you want land to continue your economic growth, and there's also scarcity now, I guess, tying back to the digital age. Even when information is abundant, like the scarcity is around like prestige and status,
Mm-hmm.
and the things that are a lot more intangible. And we're just like continue to move towards that direction because scientific progress essentially make a lot of things that used to be scarce a little bit more abundant. But the irony for human, I think, is just like when things become abundant, it also becomes the perceived value of it also decline. And that's why, we don't, and no one wants to pay for Wikipedia because,
Yeah.
people will take it for granted. But if you just take
Mm-hmm.
it away from people, I think if the site completely shut down and it's going to go away, which I think they've been asking for donation for the past years. And I wonder what that number looks like.
Mm-hmm.
But it definitely, would be, damaging for some of our experiences. Although right now there's also more option. But the point is to kind of say that, abundance has always been a concept. It's that I think it's becoming more and more prominent in the physical space because of
Mm-hmm.
scientific improvement or innovation. Abundance in the digital space or information itself, it's a relatively new concept because in the past, like information is basically power, right? Like the
Mm-hmm.
exchange of information is what creates our society,
Mm-hmm.
and exchange of ideas is what creates value. Um, And usually when value is extracted, right, from one party to the other, is usually because of information asymmetry. It's like this person knows something that, I know something that this person doesn't, and therefore I can take advantage of this person, and like being able to like layer on top, like, branding or marketing to
Mm-hmm.
create a narrative that make the exploitation a little bit more justifiable. I think that pattern, I feel like, continues to exist. But the beauty of kind of Web3, or the reason why, tying back to kind of like, like when we talk about the spirit of Web3, is that like the abundance of information also now are leading to the abundance of optionalities.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning that, because the kind of backbone of what supports DeFi or crypto or all these trends is a decentralized database, where all the value that's being captured by like Facebook, Google, by having a privatized database, you can think of like that as land, right? Like basically it's like they're privatizing these lands and be like, no one can come here, and like it's hard for people in our town to get out as well. But in Web3, it's like all the information become public. So everybody can build on top of somewhat of a more equal, database, but then you can still build differentiated services on top of it. And you can still build very exploitative system on top of it. But the beauty of it is that it's much more powerful when you can build something that aligns with the value of the participants within it, because it's so easy to just build the same structure on top of the same land somewhere else. So that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of what we talk about forking. It's like I can build the exact
Mm-hmm.
same castle on the same land. And I can even build a new city, right? Like Solana, like Ethereum, and all these different ecosystem. But then I need to be attractive enough to have people come. I can't just build like a beautiful space that's very performant, that can have all these benefits, but no one is there. Then people don't want to hang out with where the party is not happening. So yeah, that's kind of like, I think, going, because this conversation ended up being more free flowing, but that's like kind of a digression from like our initial point. But I think right now the abundance in Web3 kind of happens more so in like optionality,
Mm-hmm.
which would also leads to access, right? Like maybe
Mm-hmm.
a developer in the past was like, okay, I'm gonna build a website, I'm gonna use these framework, I'm gonna, make these decisions. And the big tech companies uses this infrastructure, and like GraphQL was invented by Facebook, like a lot of these like really well-known infrastructure are actually created by some of these best tech companies,
Mm-hmm.
and developers kind of just follow that. But let's say in Web3, I think there's also going to be a power law like that. Like a few companies will define the standards of the whole ecosystem. But then there's also become like everybody wants to be a founder, these days, especially in the early days, that there's going to be a wide range of standard that people are just going to be like, okay, now I have too many options. I don't know where to start. And that maybe can also be a little bit paralyzing. And that is why we see very frequently in Web3, like when our friends, want to get into it, the first thing they say is just like, it's so much.
Mm-hmm.
Like the information is too much. It's so overwhelming. And I think back, people always compared the beginning of Web3 as like to the beginning of the internet. And I think the biggest difference there is that the similarities is that they're both called scam, and there's a lot of this, which is also not false, because there are a lot of
Mm-hmm.
scams happening, and there's a lot of like flaws within the system. But back in Web2, I think it was just niche. But now in Web3, it's just like, it's not niche. I think everyone is aware of it. Everyone's aware of crypto. Everyone's
Mm-hmm.
aware of these concepts. But now the information is almost too excessive that it's hard to discern what is true and what is not.
Yeah, absolutely. I just thinking about that kind of beautiful imagery that you created, just explaining the digital frontier as like land in a city and having decentralized land versus centralized land. I feel like that is such a powerful narrative that I haven't really heard expressed in the way that you just did. That would really make those ideas, like just this idea of decentralization and kind of the crypto ecosystem, a lot more, like, quite accessible to a lot more people. And so I wonder, just in terms of the power of narratives, like how is it possible that I haven't heard that narrative, like when I have
Mm,
been kind of deep in Web3 for since the start of the year. And what is kind of the power and the opportunity of narratives in crypto and Web3?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that um, the power of narratives is that being able to paint, like actually tell human stories where technology is like this invisible force that support the possibility of the story. So, science fiction has always been, this genre that, people in literary world actually never took science fiction seriously. And it's like, oh, this is genre fiction. This is not art. This is not um, actual literature. But
Mm-hmm.
only recently, actually, I think science fiction has been slowly kind of ascended their status as like a legitimate piece of literature. And a lot of that is because of some authors that have made kind of stylistic strides towards that direction. And notably, I would say many people in tech know, like Ted Chiang, who wrote like Exhalations, are really good at, telling a story, like build a world. It can be in the future, it can be in the present, but a lot of it's just people are just acting the way that we are, right? It's similar to Black Mirror, also is a great
Mm-hmm.
one, where people are just like living and it's not like, oh, this technology is changing the world. It's the
Mm-hmm.
huge impact because technology itself is neutral. And I think that the danger of narrative is that in order to recruit talent and really good people to work on the stuff that sounds a little crazy, like you
Mm-hmm.
do need to tell that story. And that is the Silicon Valley narrative, right? It's just like, oh, our company is going to change the world. It will be, but the impact, right? It's not as kind of black and white as they describe it to be. Um, like for example, like Facebook, right? It's connect everybody, which
Mm-hmm.
is a great mission, and every single product decision they make is towards that mission. So like I think a lot of the critics of Facebook are like saying all these evil things that Facebook did, but like to their credit, right, they did maybe made some decisions that could have been more thoughtful, and their business model to some degree, exploitative, but like at the same time, there's demand for that service, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you think about it, like how are small businesses and long tail, advertisers able to reach other people rather than like the only a few powerful companies can afford a billboard on the highway to kind of advertise what they do, and it's a little bit more personalized, so the market is much more efficient.
Mm-hmm.
So in some way, there's demand for that service, and people actually, in some way, like there's a lot of things about self-control, addiction, and all that stuff. But in some way, it is also providing value in the way that you're able to discover things that you otherwise would not be. Like now, my Instagram definitely knows my preference more better than I do. That I haven't even shopped for the longest time because I just talk about my friends and they're just listening, and I've given in. I'm just like, okay, you can know everything about me because you do make pretty good shopping recommendations.
I do that on purpose as well. Like if I instead of searching, I'll just like speak what I'm looking for into my phone, and I'm just like, okay, Instagram, TikTok, hit me.
Totally. Yeah, and that narrative of connect everybody, right? Like kind of really define the networked company of the past, I guess, decades or so. And similar with Uber, right? Uber is like growth at
Mm-hmm.
all costs, and that literally changed the way that investors evaluate businesses. Like investors should be the people that care about money the most, but even they
Mm-hmm.
don't care about money anymore. They care about narrative, because kind of
Mm.
the way that venture capital is structured. I'm not saying that this is a good or bad thing. I'm just saying that's kind of the way that it's progressing towards. Is just like the incentive, especially for early stage investor, is that as long as they can raise, help the company raise their next round of financing, so there's a potential paper markup, then it can
Mm-hmm.
still appear attractive to the LPs, and essentially like someday that prophecy will fulfill itself, and they're just
Mm-hmm.
betting on that very slim possibility of that happening. But that possibility really would not happen if the company is just quiet and like kind of in the background and not having the capital to invest in marketing, invest in hiring, and invest in all that stuff. um, so the playbook is not that it doesn't work, but it relies very heavily on things that are not grounded in real truth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is why when you said the role of narratives, I think like hopefully in Web3, like there can be more, truthful narrative because, there's better incentive or business model that could support that, where, people that speak the truth can be properly incentivized for the work they do, which is kind of like, the some of the creator economy thesis that we already are seeing in Web
Mhm.
2. But the difference is that like, um, the bad narratives or the the narratives that are potentially just false or fake news could equally exist in Web3,
Mhm.
if the market rewards it. So you can totally see like people are talking about DAOs and all that stuff and talking about all the magic of DAOs, which I strongly believe in, like the promise that it brings. But then at the same time, it's just the same tool can also be used to like gather or mobilize people that might be doing something that's not good.
Mhm.
So yeah. Um, so back to the back to the point of narrative. I think that narrative, similar to the abundance piece that we discussed, will become more fragmented, um,
Mm.
kind of even more personalized, in a way that you kind of can choose your own adventure in a way,
Yeah.
that it's a back to the city metaphor. It's just like rather than like a big castle, that has walls around them, you can
Mhm.
still build big castles, but people can also leave. It's not like there's a
Mhm.
many like real wall around it, which is not completely true. This is hypothetical. I'm just talking strictly about blockchain because there's also geopolitical things that are outside of our control that are happening around the world that's physically constraining you to do things.
Mhm.
But just speaking within the language of the internet, now people have more optionality to live the narrative that feel like they suit them the best and make them feel really good, which could be a good thing and a bad thing. So yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I often think about this, which is, would I be okay with a life that kind of moves from a 5 to a 7 out in a 1 to 10 scale? Or
Mm,
do I want the 10s at the risk of the ones? Like, the real highs,
interesting.
or, but they will probably come with the real lows. And
Mm,
so it's really interesting, this idea of optionality and how, we are born into nation states which have physical locations, and we are restricted by passports and visas and
mm-hmm,
citizenship and all those sorts of things, in terms of just our optionality to kind of move even just across the world physically,
mm-hmm.
and to
Yeah.
work and things like that. And so, but then you come onto the internet and you can be everywhere and anywhere that you want to be.
Yep.
And I I because in the physical world I've opted for this, which is like I'll take the 10 and 1 model. But I wonder, when I look at kind of the majority of people, I would say that 5 to 7 is very, very hard to pass up, because it is
Mm,
still, it's a very comfortable and good life. And there are many kind of stresses and unintended, unforeseeable events that I don't know kind of how we are equipped to deal with them, with everything else that's going on in our lives. And so I wonder, in terms of optionality and that huge majority of people moving onto the internet and having those choices, is there anything that will, like, you would advise people that or maybe
mm,
people that you don't know so well, that are not in your kind of immediate circle, but like a few circles removed, that would
mm.
help them kind of come to terms with this idea of like how, how much optionality is at their disposal and how to make those decisions? And because I definitely kind of imagined that you're like on the gate, you're on the boundary of this piece of land, and you're just like, what? Like, until now, I've been kind
Mm,
of, taken on a path, on a particular path. I know this is the path I go down. It's a road. It's been cemented, and it's been like that for 100 years. Whereas now, I feel like in Web3, we're kind of, there are paths, and maybe only literally a few people have walked down them, or you might be the first. And I wonder, like, mentally, how you think about kind of navigating that uncharted territory.
mm. There are so many layers to that question that I would like to
Sorry.
explore personally. No, with you. No, they're fascinating questions. There are just so many thoughts in my head now. I think first of all, I love the metaphor of standing like on the border and
Hmm.
being afraid to kind of, take a step forward. A lot of people talk about freedom as a value of society, which is basically optionality.
Hmm.
And the whole idea of America was founded upon this idea of optionality, where as long as you don't break the law and do evil, you can kind of do whatever you want, which I think is still the biggest value prop of America, despite a lot of
Agree.
things that might not be as good,
Hmm.
in the country. Like, it still attracts the best talent because of that feature.
Hmm.
And it's same thing with the internet, right? Like, it attracts the people that crave that type of optionality.
Hmm.
But then what ended up happening is that, when you're able to take that much risk, right? Like, the curve just ended up looking like there's going to be more long tail events. So like there's going to be more outliers. And that means, there's going to be existence of something like Amazon, Google,
Hmm.
Facebook, people like companies that are really crazy, can really thrive on the land of innovation, and it's being supported here. Versus, I don't know if you follow what's happening in China right now, but I'm not going to talk too much about it.
Hmm.
But some of the largest companies are basically, because of some regulatory changes, um, became some of them became nonprofits, and basically become a public good.
Hmm.
And that environment just doesn't incentivize this innovation as much.
Hmm.
Um, and but the irony of that is that the existence of outlier and freedom actually paralyzes most people, and that's why inequality is such a
Yes.
problem also in America.
Hmm.
That a lot of people don't want optionality. It's not that they're not
Yes.
smart, it's not that they're not talented. Like, they kind of just like a few things, and they want those, and they know what they like, and they're like not about that crazy billionaire or like kind of dreamer lifestyle, that a lot of people in America want, and
Yeah.
they kind of were also born here, and they're like, I kind of just want a simple life.
Hmm. Hmm.
I want to paint every day, and they should be able to do that
Yeah.
without feeling like they are strange or weird for doing so.
Hmm.
And now I think going back to what we talked about as like standing on the border of Web3, and I think what's going to happen, like very predictably, is, and that is similar with what happened when people migrate from offline on the internet. It's
Hmm.
just like things are going to be more efficient, and a lot of that is driven by financial incentive. So the ability for the financial system to run more smoothly, more permissionlessly, will allow talented people that kind of were the backbone of modern finance back in the days, that created all these interesting financial products that made the financial system more mature globally, and also mess a lot of things up. Like, the same type of people
Yeah.
would basically, there will be more of them and more global, right? Like, basically now the beauty of Web3 is that, like, any person who wants to basically play the game of capitalism, which is kind of this driving force of, now maybe we're calling it post-capitalism, the force of where the world is moving, um, then there's going to be more participants that participate in that, and with a commercial value, also creates enough abundance to being able to support art. Those
Hmm.
financial backbones are being able to support you. It's back to the Renaissance thing. It's like the commercial success kind of enable also a lot of these other things to exist, and that value becomes a lot more subjective, meaning that hopefully people can soon realize that they can do whatever they want, and as long as they're really good at what they do, they can make a living out of it. They can
Hmm.
take that as their career, and be fine. But it takes people to kind of really do that migration of like, okay, shopping used to happen offline, and now we bring it online. So like, kind of make that unfamiliar things into something familiar, so people feel safe to move forward, or else they would just be standing there and
Hmm.
don't know where to go. Um, so it's almost like right now, a lot of my friends are actually undergoing this. It's like all quitting their jobs and like all
Hmm.
questioning everything. It's like, oh, like why? Like, they're my friends who I didn't really respect, right, from elementary school, who didn't go to school, who are playing video games all day and now become a crypto millionaire. And I am like, at this like supposedly prestigious place, and my boss is like, you respect me, and I'm like working crazy hours. Like, what is this all for? And this almost happens on a day-to-day basis.
Wow.
And but then when they actually want to transition right
Mm-hmm.
into Web3, they're just like, oh my god, like I don't know what's my place here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you just kind of like gotta be in Web3 and recreate that environment that's
Mm-hmm.
familiar to them again, and slowly guide them. So that's why I think the role that you're playing in the ecosystem, that's like a storyteller, a
Mm-hmm.
steward, is so incredibly important. It's like when you land on the foreign land, like the first thing you want is like one, familiarity, and the other is like guidance. It's just like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, like what do I do here? And speak their language.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, it's funny because everyone speaks English, but if you're new to Web3, you're literally like
Yeah.
reading a new language. You're like, what is this? Like, are these people real?
Mm-hmm.
And that's like actually so real, right? Like when
Yes.
you talk about, like when I talk in crypto language, especially when I talk with crypto founders only for a week, and I go
Mm-hmm.
back and talk to my parents, talk to my the people in my life, it's just they just think I'm crazy, and to talk about finance in that way. So yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of work around narrative that you mentioned, and the work around like going to a new city, what you need, perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, I try to think of, I just thought of this actually just a couple of days ago, but so my experience of Disneyland, like the one time that I've been, is that I feel like all of the staff are, the memo that they get is that this has to be the happiest day of someone's life when they come to Disneyland. And it's kind of your job to make that true. And so every interaction, just my experience, I hope it's the same for others, but every interaction was just so overwhelmingly positive, basically, like whether it was to ask for directions or stop and talk to anyone who was on the staff. And so I kind of think it's interesting in Web3 because we are all, anyone who is already kind of a citizen, like a crypto native citizen, almost is by default also kind of a steward and a guide in some
Totally.
sense. And I try to think, if I'm welcoming people into Disneyland or, Web3, I can create that experience for them. I can give them
Mm-hmm.
that really heartwarming, overwhelmingly positive, oh my goodness, this is the happiest place on earth kind of feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just like something I run through in my head, and it made me think of that. And then kind of tying this all into this kind of building a city narrative
Mm-hmm.
that we're talking about. And I wonder just in terms of what kind of brought about this idea of station, and especially, just hearing about your friends, I can also relate to that, this kind of meaning crisis where you're like, this doesn't align with me. I think it over there does, but I don't know how to go from here to there.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I just love to know kind of like how even the last few months have been for you in terms of that journey with Station.
Totally. Yeah, I created Station just really because of the exact same reason that we talked
Mm-hmm.
about. It's just so many friends and so many people are peeping in, and kind of need. It's almost like there's this great land that they're kind of seeing. There's like
Mm-hmm.
a party happening there that's really far away, and then they're like back, kind of stuck on the other side of the ocean, and like
Mm-hmm.
kind of there's no way to get there. So the idea of station really comes about. It's like, oh, what does a station look like? Where it's like like a literal metaphor of a train that transport people over,
Mm-hmm.
and actually build a railroad of connecting ideas and projects together. And what does a network on top of, either it's Ethereum or just on crypto look like? Because,
Mm-hmm.
despite everything being open and transparent, doesn't mean that they will be visualized in the way that people can understand. It's almost like you're here in a land and everything is open, and you can build anything on it. People like you can do anything. But just like New York City, right? Like when it
Mm-hmm.
just started, it has all these buildings, all these ecosystem, but it's really the railroad system in New York that
Mm-hmm.
connects people and commerce and projects together, in a very routine way. And over time, right, commercial centers are built around station, are built around these hubs where people commute. Um, I've always been fascinated by like urban design. Like I grew up in a city, in a very highly populated, like densely populated city in China. And
Hmm.
when I was young, I traveled to Tokyo and, like Shanghai and all these places. And I saw how, the design of the public infrastructure can really, make and break a city.
Hmm.
And, I personally really deeply care about the Web3 ecosystem and the city that is enabling, or the cities plural, because there are many cities right now in Web3, and thinking about like how do we build a station where people
Hmm.
can come and like be able to find their destination that they want to go to. So that's really where the idea came about, and kind of on top of that, there's also this um, idea around the lack of identity for these people who come on.
Mm.
Because one of the first advice that I got super lucky that when I got into crypto, I think I was somewhat vocal about it, that I started maybe tweeting a little bit, writing a little bit about it, that,
Hmm.
really, really great, smart, and accomplished people in the field actually just reach out to me out of nowhere. And I feel like I was describing this experience to one of my partner at my firm, Jordan, that I feel like I kind of encountered this Yoda from a forest that just emerged and like was like trying to guide me into going on this journey. It's actually Zero X Maki from Sushi Swap.
Oh, wow.
And then he told me, he's like, it's great to see someone who's from the traditional world come into
Hmm.
Web3. And I was like, I didn't come from that of a traditional world. Like, I still come from like
Oh,
high tech, but that's
oh my goodness. If Zero X Maki thinks that your path is traditional, there is like no hope for any of us, because Tina, you have like the most untraditional, like wild, incredible journey to
oh
where you are. And
no,
so
no, no. I'll give like, but I am like technically some decently new to crypto. So
mhm,
I was like, okay, tell me more. No, basically I said better late than never. And then he started giving me really, really good advice. So he's like, the first thing you should do is to be anonymous, create a pseudonymous account,
mhm,
and basically build your identity around the work you do, not by your prestige. And I was like, that is actually the single piece of advice that I actually give to my personal friends as well.
mhm.
It's just like, but it's hard to really persuade them to do that, right? In
Yeah.
Web2, it's just like, what's the incentive of doing that? There really
Mhm,
isn't. Versus in Web3, like, it's almost like a chance to become a new self in a way that you're not tied to your past identity. You
yes.
are reinventing somebody new, and that is like what kind of from a social development perspective, it's uh, this philosopher's name is escaping me, but it's kind of adult development psychology theory, where
Mhm,
most people are in this mind where they basically abide the laws of society, right? And that is like the social mind. But then a very, very few percentage of population, I think like less than 1%, are they're called a self-transforming mind.
mhm,
I used to write about this extensively when I still was in school, because I was so fascinated by the concept of like self-reinvention. Some of
mhm,
the greatest people, like including CEOs, right? Like, to be honest, like CEOs for different stages of company have very, very different demands. So like a CEO for a really, really early project versus a CEO for a high growth and also for an IPO level company are so different. But the best CEO who can actually go through that, they already become four different people like throughout that
mhm,
journey.
mhm,
There's still probably consistency within their disposition, but
mhm,
they really become different. They just are able to be flexible enough to change themselves. And actually, I do believe that most people have the capacity to do that,
mhm,
if given the right circumstance, and that's how human as a kind of as a whole develop, right? Um, that the ability to give them the courage to do so is tremendously
mhm,
important. So the other question that we ask on station is just like, when we transport people, how do we also give them the sense of identity, and feel like they're adding value right away, and really reduce time from interest in converting that to action? Because back to the embedded education thing again,
mhm,
it's just like, if it's not translated to action, the education is not embedded. You're reading a bunch of things. You're reading all these white papers. You're listening to podcasts. You're watching YouTube videos. All amazing ways to learn,
mhm.
but it's just there's just like you have to internalize some of these knowledge when you actually do and build, and that kind of get absorbed in you. Not everyone learns this way, and I completely understand that. But without doing, like the sense of identity isn't completely fulfilled within this new realm of Web3. So that's also something that we're kind of tackling with as well. And building that subway system on the other side of the market also serves the protocols and the DAOs and the groups that actually need talent to go there as
Mm-hmm.
well. So right now they feel like definitely have been hanging out in the same city, seeing the same faces over and
Mm-hmm.
over again, and now they actually need to host their presence somewhere else, and that's why we see a lot of advertising in travel hubs, right? That's like one of the ways to market expand is when international travelers can come in and see the ads of a local brand. That's when they raise awareness. So I think there's also from a demand side of the marketplace for talent, for people, for interesting ideas to come in, a place for them to showcase their work as well. So it's really, I know it sounds really ambitious, but we're just starting small from helping people get into Web3 by giving them some guidance. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate kind of what you mentioned about the importance of public architecture and how, yeah, New York is just like a perfect example of how the railway almost dictates life and, what goes on and where it goes on. And so that's so exciting. And I think that this kind of 0 to 1 stage of the journey is so important because, like you said, when you're, in a room in Web3 or on crypto Twitter or wherever it is, and you're seeing kind of like the same 500 people,
Yeah.
it feels like a lot of people for a while, and then you're like, wait, I almost know 500 people by name, and there are probably more people out there than this, and so
Totally.
that 0 to 1 is so important, and I think that hopefully people are starting to realize also that the kind of how Web3 and crypto plays out is determined by the breadth and diversity of experiences of the people that are involved. And so,
Mm-hmm.
I'm so excited about Station. And I think that if it's possible to be overly confident in a very ambitious plan, then I'm like very ambitious, very confident about Station and how it
Oh,
unfolds. Um,
thank
and
you.
yeah, I also, so I have to say that your Fake Pixels Substack, like your newsletter, is so incredible, and I was reading, I don't know which particular piece it was, but I literally got goosebumps on my knees.
Wow.
and
Thank you.
um, and so I was just like, I can't even imagine how much time does it take in terms of like thinking about something, say, like this embedded education piece, which is something I'm really interested in. How much time from when you notice something, when it kind of becomes a trend in your mind, to writing a piece and putting it out? What does that process of kind of content creation look like for you?
Totally. That's a great question. I think every creator will have a different answer to that question.
Absolutely.
Um, to be quite honest, like I think there's all these roles that we take on, right? Like we are investors, like we
Mm-hmm.
are there's different things. Um, like personally, like I kind of like if different people have different ways of internalizing it, but I internalize everything I do through the lens of creation, and I think it's
Yeah.
like a little bit of a compulsive thing. It's like
Mm.
if I don't create, it's like I'm not eating, or like it's like I need water. And I definitely realized that part about myself, and even investing as an exercise for me is to be able to identify patterns in
Mm-hmm.
things that I think would be great to explore. And when I find a founder, or when I find someone who has an idea towards that direction, and being able to enable them to get there, like that is the most fulfilling thing like in the world, is to understand like when all those forces are aligned towards the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
um, and the ability to see the end state of a story, and then having the ability and the clarity of the technology enable the incentive structure of
Mhm.
the ecosystem, and also the narrative to get to that end state of the vision. And I actually see the construction of storytelling or crafting a piece of essay somewhat similarly. It's like
Mm.
there's this end state of the world that I'm hypothesizing. Like for example, I wrote about like this local city DAO, or like
Mhm.
being able to mobilize people with similar passion around the world. Um, and that is something that I feel like should always exist, right? But whether it actually can exist now is something that I want to understand. And I basically craft my idea backward and be like, okay, this is the end
Mm.
state. Like, what are the needed technology, like narratives, and also incentive design that could allow those things to happen. And by internalizing the world that way, like you're basically able to create a set of, I guess, parameters for you to kind of look at, both as an investor, as an entrepreneur, as a writer,
Mhm.
to basically craft those things, or piece those pieces together to get to that end result. I know that's a very abstract answer,
No,
um,
I love it. I
but
love it. um,
yeah.
I feel like I'm taking life notes right now because like this idea of narratives, technology, and incentives as a framework is I think even could be broader in application than just like investors and entrepreneurs and kind of content creators. I would honestly, now that I'm thinking about it, say I am teaching my daughter to read, but if I think about it, like you just said, you move forward into the future and you think about how it might empower her, and then kind of
Hmm.
work backwards in terms of like the technology, and then kind of figure out the incentives to take action. And so, so no, I'm really grateful for that framework, and I
Oh,
honestly
thank you.
I feel like I'm gonna apply it everywhere.
Oh
um,
my God. Yeah. That's you're living through my brain. That's literally how I process everything. It's just like, what is the incentive of all the people involved? What story are they telling each other,
mhm,
not just themselves? Basically, that would figure out the sales pitch, right? It's like when I look at a company and then there's
mhm,
like all these participants within that network, I'm just like, oh, like how are they selling to their customers? How are they selling to their employees? How are they
mhm,
selling each other? Like how are they internally motivated to do this? Basically it's the internal mission. How are they telling that story externally? And that is like the both the narrative and the incentive, right? Because usually the incentive is part of the narrative. It's like,
mhm.
oh, this will save you time, this will save you
Yes.
money, this will make you richer, this will make you more beautiful. And then the technology is basically whether it's a scam, like just a
Mhm.
story, or it can actually be possible. So yeah.
Yeah, and even just doing that exercise of kind of
Yeah.
jumping into different people's shoes, I feel like that takes a level of kind of mental gymnastics that has
Hmm.
to. I don't know if it's practiced or if it's kind of innate. If you feel like you've always been able to do that, but how how do you kind of how do you balance knowing your identity and then also just kind of always being able to move between a range of positions for different
Hmm.
things, no matter what it is?
Yeah, that's a great question. To be quite honest, I talk to my friends about this too. It's like
Okay.
I think that I'm definitely the type of like personality that don't have a
Mm-hmm.
very strong sense of identity.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think that I am very fluid.
Mm-hmm.
That um, I think I really enjoy being think like someone else's for a day or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So
I can
like being
totally
able
relate to
to,
this.
yeah. It's like, oh, what would this person do? What would the other person think? It's a very fun exercise for me to see a bigger picture of the world. And sometimes, like, those things can come into something that's really beautiful. And that's when I start to feel that compulsive, like, desire to make something or write about something or create something.
Mm-hmm.
And that come in the form of sometimes it manifests in the form of an investment, sometimes it come in the form of a piece of writing, a company, or a project like Station, which could turn into something bigger. So all of that are kind of manifestation of the same, I guess, desire or inspiration. I think I just pick the medium that could express this the best. If station is just a piece of writing, I think it will also have a lot of impact. But I think in this case, it's something that you can actually build. So we thought it would be better to just build it and make it into a product. And the team right now that I'm working with all believe in this end state so strongly.